Good evening. I'm Elaine Cercado, an executive coach, consultant, trainer, facilitator, and director of POWERinU Philippines. I welcome you to this complimentary webinar, Empathize to Engage. I'm very honored to have a very good friend and also a speaker whom I admire much. And I'd like to introduce her now. Her name is Cheyenne Yo. Cheyenne is a TEDx speaker and a graduate of the prestigious Master of Applied Positive Psychology program at the University of Pennsylvania. She has been featured on national TV documentary Chasing Happiness in Straits Times, Business Times, and on Radio 93.8 Live and Money 89.3 FM. Recently, she was identified as one of LinkedIn Asia's top mental health advocates to follow. As a founder of Happiness Scientists, she has trained more than 20,000 people in Singapore and beyond. Her clients include Visa, GIC, CapitaLand, and Love Bonito. Everyone, please welcome our speaker, Miss Cheyenne Yo. Hi, Cheyenne.
Hi, Elaine. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And hi, good evening to all of you. I'm not sure where everyone is dialing in from, but maybe we'll get started by typing in where you're calling in from this evening. Please help me to type that into the chat as we wait for more people to join us. And as I start to introduce a little bit more about my background. As Elaine has mentioned, I did my master's in positive psychology, and for tonight, I'm here based in Singapore. I'm really, really grateful to be able to run this webinar for all of you, and I look forward to a night of engagement. I'm sure you'll have questions, so please continue to post the questions as we go through the webinar. So tonight's topic, Empathize to Engage, is something that really speaks to me, and I hope it speaks to you as well. What we have been through as a whole world with the COVID pandemic has made this topic even more important. As I work with leaders and their organizations and also the employees, one of the most common feedback that's given to me is that things are so difficult. I'm experiencing burnout. I don't know when to stop working. Now, if you're in the audience and you're a leader yourself, probably you'll be wondering, gosh, how do I manage this and how do I interact and support my staff, even as I may need support myself? And so tonight's webinar has been tailored with this in mind, Empathize to Engage. A little bit about my background. As mentioned, I did my master's in positive psychology about 11 years ago. It feels almost like it happened yesterday because the learning is still so fresh in my mind, given that I run webinars and workshops and trainings almost every other day. Aside from my professional background, I'm also a TEDx speaker. And just yesterday, 2 days ago, and also 3 years ago, I had the opportunity to share about my story towards happiness and creating the life that I want on the TEDx stage. So that's me and my speaker self. But of course, the one that touches my heart the most is this picture, my two daughters. I have a 13-year-old and an 8-year-old. Over the last 11 years, I've worked with many, many clients. I work with schools, I work with corporates in Singapore and around the region. And I'm just so grateful every single time I get the opportunity to work with clients whom I respect and admire for their emphasis on their people and not just the task. So what's on the plate for tonight? Of course, we are going to dive a little bit more into what's empathy. Some of you have sent in questions. What exactly is that? How do we do that? So tonight we're going to share as well, how do you build and how do you practice empathy at work? Although tonight is really focused on the workplace, many of the strategies I share with you are also relevant outside the workplace, with your loved ones, with your family members, even with your friends. So I hope that you'll find this webinar doubly useful. So let me look at some statistics before we begin. I'm going to show you some statistics on employee engagement and also employee innovation. This survey was taken, of course, done in the US, but I think it's really interesting data because it was surveying more than 11,000 people. And they found that in terms of employee engagement, when there is low empathy from senior leaders or managers, the statistics looks different, especially in terms of being able to engage employees. For example, when senior leaders show low empathy towards their employees, engagement is at about 32%. When their direct supervisor or their manager shows low empathy, engagement is 24%. However, if they are skillful in being able to relate and empathize with their employees, for senior leaders, the percentage jumps up to 76%. That is a huge 40% jump. And with managers, it becomes 67%, also about 40%. Now, this statistic shows very clearly that when senior leaders and managers are able to empathize with their staff, whether it is they're going through some personal challenge, whether it is they're facing challenges at work, then the employees are more likely to be engaged. Okay. The second one is about innovation. Now, many of the clients that I work with often come to me and say, why are they not coming up with new ideas? And of course, it could be that they're tired. It could be that they've tried the idea and it didn't work. But empathy has also got a role to play in this department. And again, let's look at the statistics. When senior leaders show low empathy, employee innovation is 13%. Maybe they don't feel motivated to try new things because they're not sure if it's going to be met with a listening ear or someone who is understanding of their perspective. For managers, it's also about 13%. However, innovation jumps up when the leader is empathetic, here by about 50%, and for the managers, about 30%. So you'll be thinking, wow, empathy, it seems like a magic pill. Can I have some of that? So what exactly is empathy, right? And why is empathy so important? Well, a lovely quote from Simon Sinek goes like this. Empathy is being concerned about the human being, not just their output. Many, many years ago, I was working in a college with students, and I was the inaugural director there of wellness, looking after the students' overall well-being. I was the counselor, I was the coach. You could say I was everything under the sun that supported their well-being, designer of programs, what have you. I was playing a really huge, important role. However, one day, I received a text message on my phone. And it just so happened to coincide with a natural disaster that happened in Sabah. What happened was a group of students had gone to Sabah with their teachers on a learning journey during the school holidays. And unfortunately, it was then that an earthquake struck. And sadly, some students and teachers lost their life. Being a trained counselor, we were all activated to support the families in their grief at the funeral, to prevent them from facing the media, to just be there and be present. However, I also had a role in the college. And so I went to my then supervisor and said, this has happened and I'd really like to go to support these families. But at the same time, I also have a duty here to support our students. At the time, we hadn't hired an additional counselor. Me going away would mean that other people on the team would have to double up and do my job, which was a very specific and niche job. I was half expecting my boss to say, no, you're needed here, and this is where your duty lies. However, his response really touched me. The first thing he said was, oh dear, it must be so difficult to hear about this bad news, especially since you too were once a teacher. And then he said, no question about it. Your duty belongs to them. Your country needs you. And with that, he gave me 3 days off did not ask me to take any personal leave or professional leave, and gave me that time to stand by with the families through their grief. I was so touched because he demonstrated what Simon Sinek states on the screen. Empathy is about being concerned about the human being, not just their output. Did the college survive in my absence? Absolutely. But it's only because the leader showed the way it's possible. That when you empathize, you care about the person. And guess what? When I came back after the 3 days, I felt so connected, not just to my supervisor, but also to the work. And I was determined to give my 150% from there on. I hope that story jolted something in you as you think about what does empathy mean. Empathy means a lot of things, but let me share with you 2 types of empathy that we can be a little bit more aware of. The first is cognitive empathy. Now, cognitive, as the term implies, has got to do with what's happening in your mind, also known as perspective taking, meaning that you think, or at least you try to think about what the other person might be going through, whether it's the way they are thinking, whether it's the kind of emotions they might be experiencing, and just becoming aware, right? Or maybe imagining how your colleague may be seeing things from their unique perspective. Now, as we go through whatever it is we're going through now, we all see things also through different lenses, whether it's cultural lenses, whether it's role lenses. For example, I'm a mom, I'm also a business owner, right? I'm also a sister, I'm also a daughter. So as we think through different perspectives, this is what we call cognitive empathy. A simple way to understand it, or a simple question that you could ask is, if I were in his or her position, what would I be thinking right now? What would I be thinking right now? So the first step begins even by saying anything, but by thinking about what the person could be experiencing and attempting to see it from their perspective. Emotional empathy, as the name implies, has got to do more with the emotions. While cognitive is where you think about it, emotions is where you feel it. So in some way, you feel the same emotion as the other person. It doesn't mean that you have to experience something that the other person has gone through. For example, my supervisor did not have to experience a loss of somebody in an earthquake, but he understood loss. He understood what it meant to feel sad. He understood what it meant to want to help. And therefore, he could, at that moment, feel the same emotion as me. Feeling concern for someone else as you see them struggle, he could tell that I was in a dilemma. And he was concerned about me and what I wanted to do. Last of all, responding to the pain or struggle with compassion. His response was to take action and give me that time off. Notice that emotional empathy also comes with some behaviors or actions, going beyond just showing the concern, but sometimes even taking a step forward into behaviors or action. A simple question to ask is, if I were in his, her, or their position, how would I feel? How would it make me feel? Hence, what might they be feeling right now? These 2 simple questions can help us get into the state of mind where we can begin thinking and also feeling what the other person might be going through. Now, some of you may be feeling, wow, doesn't that mean that I need to become vulnerable? What if I'm at the workplace and I don't want to show my emotions? I don't want to feel what they're feeling because I'll get triggered and I'll be so emotional. While that is true, we are not asking you to feel and jump in and be 100% with them. What I'm asking you to do is just to imagine being in their shoes and imagine their perspective, which might need you to relate to an experience that you might have had that is similar. But you do not need to go in and be there with them as they are going through the struggle 100%. In some way, you also need to learn, if you're a leader, to practice your self-care and boundaries. But that should not prevent you from communicating or showing empathy to your employees. Just like what my supervisor did. He expressed his concern. He understood what I was going through, but he did not have to jump in and get himself embroiled in all my emotions. But what he did was to give me the permission to go and do what I needed to do. So in a nutshell, cognitive versus emotional empathy. With cognitive, you're taking another person's perspective and imagining what it's like. With emotional, you're sharing almost as if you experience it yourself. And sometimes it means that you may feel a little bit of distress. But again, self-care, of course, must come first. And so be able to draw that boundary. And if you do, in the midst of trying to empathize with someone, feel that you're getting pulled in, I think it's perfectly okay to let them know, to say, hey, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. And maybe you may not be the best person to support them at that moment, in which case you could point them to other resources who could be better positioned to support them. So I hope that provides some clarity between cognitive and emotional empathy. So with that distinction a bit clearer now, for those of you who asked the question what exactly it is, then what does leading with empathy actually look like? Aside from the story, there are some key ideas that we can work with. Number one, communicating with a personal touch. I know of an employee who told me that after 3 years, her immediate supervisor still called her she or her and never referred to her by first name. And she said, am I invisible? Do I not mean anything? Did he not even bother to get to know my name? Imagine if that was you. Sometimes it's just the small things, the personal touch, calling someone's name, making eye contact when you communicate, right? Or even maybe noticing some ways or preferences in which to communicate. For example, some people like to have one-to-one conversations, and some people find that confrontational. Empathy, when you imagine what someone might be experiencing, that can help you to tailor the way in which you communicate with them. How about making space for connection? Now, one of the things we probably experienced over the last 2+ years going through the pandemic was a break in connection with some people in our lives. At the workplace, many of us were in hybrid mode. We saw everybody's heads, but not their bodies. And some of us may actually have felt very isolated. Empathy, because it's got to do with caring, because it's got a lot to do with thinking about the other person, is really the hub for connection. So when you lead with empathy, remember that you are working with a human being, and therefore you need to make time and space to connect with the person instead of just jumping straight on the task the moment you see the person. Hey, have you done this? Hey, what about the KPI? Hey, what about the task? Because the person is after a while going to start thinking that, well, you only care about the task. You don't actually care about me. Okay. Next one, seeing situations from their perspective. For some of us, this skill might be challenging because we may not have actually practiced it a lot. But with many other skills, empathy is also something that we can build our capacity. So to begin to see situations from their perspective, you can ask that question. If I were them, what might they be going through? And if you don't know, you may ask maybe people around you in your circle, maybe not within the same company outside, hey, what do you think a person in this role or this position or having to deal with this in their family, how might they see things? Sometimes we may not understand immediately, but if we are curious, if we really seek to understand and we ask enough questions, hopefully that will give us more clarity on their perspective. Respecting the boundaries of work and home life. I remember being at a webinar during one of the sessions, and then one of the employees texted me and he said, I'm getting messages from 7 in the morning all the way to 12 at night. Even though they say I don't need to reply, I just can't help it. I feel that if I don't, they'll think I'm slacking. Now, I don't know if you also feel that way sometimes, but being a leader that leads with empathy is also important to recognize the boundaries of work and home life. People who have a family, or even if they don't have a young family at home, they probably want to do other things to unwind after a long day at work. And hence, it may be important for you to recognize that. Maybe after 5:30 or 6, whatever the cutoff time is for you in your organization, to refrain from sending stuff unless it is absolutely urgent, that maybe is needed for the meeting the following day. And most importantly, while you know to respect it, please also communicate it to your employees, because we may think that they know it, but they may still feel nervous and anxious, because if you if you don't communicate it, they may think, does he mean it? Does she mean it? Are you sure? I think to be safe, I'm going to make sure that I respond anyway, even though, it's in the policy. So I think leading with empathy means going a step further and letting them know, hey, in our work policy, after 6, we are not going to text, and I'm going to commit to that. And similarly, I would like for you not to do so. If you reply, I'm not going to reply to you. And if you do reply, they are going to start feeling the urge to reply, right? It's like a chicken and egg thing. Okay, so leading with empathy, these are just some pointers to start thinking about if you are in this position of leadership. So other than that, here are some really practical strategies. I wanted to give you some handles so that you'll know exactly what to say, what to do, how does empathy actually look like in a very tangible way. Okay. So the first way that we can really engage using empathy is by being a good listener. So active listening, as the name implies, means that you are really seeking to understand the person in front of you. So one of the ways you could do that is by acknowledging and validating feelings. For example, when your employee shares something challenging with you, you could say, wow, sounds like you are feeling anxious. Sounds like this project is very complicated, right? Or maybe you see them trying to grapple with a newborn. Maybe they've just come back from maternity leave and they look very tired, and they have bloodshot eyes and stuff like that. You can say things like, wow, it must be hard to look after a newborn and still be coming to work and trying to hit your targets, right? Or if you're not quite sure how they're feeling and they're sharing some things, you can use this phrase. Well, what I hear you saying is, right? And that shows that you are actually interested and curious about what they are experiencing. And when you say what I hear you saying, if, for example, you got it wrong, they can still say, yeah, something like that. But actually what I'm trying to say is this. It just provides an opportunity for connection. Okay, so acknowledging and validating feelings is part of active listening. Second one is to meet them where they are, not where you are. Sometimes I see leaders make this mistake. They see it from their perspective, but when they communicate, they're still using their own perspective instead of the employee's perspective. So for example, maybe the employee is sharing a challenge that they're encountering at the workplace and is talking about the challenge here. But from the leader's perspective, it's like, well, this doesn't seem like a challenge, so why are you getting upset about it? You get over it, you'll know how to manage it. But what do you see on the screen in front of me is that the employee is here, but the leader is coming in from their perspective, and the two do not meet. And when they do not meet, not only is there no connection, the employee starts to feel, hey, my supervisor doesn't care, because he or she or they only see it from their perspective. So if your employee is here, when I say meet them where they are, we need to connect with them at their perspective. So instead of dismissing and saying, this is a small problem, you can deal with it because that's your perspective, you can just listen and say, tell me more about what you're experiencing, right? Instead of trying to fix the problem, give solutions, or talk them out of it. Nah, it's not that difficult. Over time, when you get to my position, you'll understand how it feels like. Right? Sometimes we have good intentions, but it comes out in a way that conveys that you don't care. Okay, so meet them where they are, not where you are. Next one, avoid judgment. Whenever you use the word why did you do that? Why are you taking so long to get this report to me? Why? The immediate response from the employee is, I'm going to block. I'm going to defend. You see, even if it's a well-intentioned why, it still makes people want to block. Okay, so other ways that we show judgment is, you've been in the company for so long, you should know what to do by now. You should. How can I trust you if you don't know anything, right? So whenever you hear shoulds, it can come across again as judgmental, or you can words that are very on the black and white ends of the spectrum. You're always like that, right? You always want to do things this way. So whenever you respond to your employee or even the people in your life, remember, avoid judgment. Judgment puts up people's defenses. Judgment makes people want to disconnect from you. All judgment and disconnection are what we call empathy blockers. Okay, and if we really want to engage, we can't have a blocked relationship with the other party. Now, I mentioned at the start of the webinar that although I'm talking about it from employer to employee, you also see how relevant these are. If you have children, you also find that these are really useful. If you have parents, you also find that these are useful, right? And if you have friends who are going through a hard time, these skills can also be very relevant. Okay, so first, really practical skill, active listening. Moving on to the second one, ask empathy building questions. Now, many people share with me, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do when someone's through a hard time. If I say this, will they get more upset? And therefore they opt to remain quiet. And sometimes in the absence of words, it's okay just to be present and be quiet. But sometimes it's really hard to empathize if you have no information as to what's going on. And that's where empathy building questions can actually be very helpful. For example, we can ask a simple question. Hey, how are you doing? Now, if the person replies, I'm fine, I'm okay, you could go a little bit further and say, hey, I really want to know, how's things going for you? And if you want it to be even more specific, how are things going for you today? What's on your agenda today? Really, it's just about getting to know them a little better. Okay, of course, we are not here to force people, right? If they don't respond, we're going to chase them around the block and make sure they do. We are not asking you to do that. But when we ask a question, when we listen, when we relate to someone, of course, it has to be genuine and sincere. Another great question is, what has been your experience recently, right? Or maybe in your organization, you're going through a lot of changes. Then you could say this, hey, how are you managing given the workload and the recent changes in the company structure, right? After the pandemic, a lot of companies currently are going through a lot of restructuring, reorganization, and therefore people are in a state of constant change. Now, as a leader, asking this question means that you acknowledge that it must not be easy, and it is built into the question, right? How are you managing given the workload and changes recently? How are you doing, right? So notice that these are open questions. Okay, we don't ask, are you managing well? And then the person might have yes or no. And then after that, you have to ask another question. Okay, so open-ended questions are helpful. Next one, offer support. How can I or the organization actually best help you? Right? Sometimes we think that they need to come up to us and ask for everything. But bear in mind, sometimes if there's a power differential, they might not feel comfortable doing that. And therefore, it is our role as a leader to step forward and say, how can I or the organization best help you? If they are lost for words, you can give some examples, right? For example, you can do this, we can do this, right? For example, if you are struggling with managing a young child, what might be helpful? This is something we've done for other employees. Do you think this would benefit you? Sometimes they get stuck or they think that it's not in their place to ask. Therefore, us taking the first step can also be very helpful. Next one, what is some feedback you might have for me? Now, leaders find it very nervous to ask this question, because what if they tell me everything that's wrong about me? But we also want to approach this question with a growth mindset, right? And that is, if they are willing to share this feedback, then you as a leader can get better at what you're doing, and you can grow and learn how to support them in ways that they need to be supported. Okay, so asking for feedback, if you don't want to do this in a direct way, you could also have a periodic anonymized form sent to them and ask for some feedback. For example, what is one thing that would improve your experience in our team or our organization? And if it's anonymous, you may not know who sent it, but at least you get an indication of what might be getting in the way of them being able to be their best. After all, if we want to engage them, it means that we want them to also be supported, right? To know that they can do their best here in the organization. Okay, so I hope that these questions are a good starting point. Of course, you may already have with you some other questions that you're able to use. And if you have some ideas, you can also type them into the chat, right? Type some of the other questions that you have used into the chat as well. Okay, so skill number 1, active listening. Skill number 2, ask empathy building questions. Okay, now let's move on to number 3. Okay. Being there for them. Now you may be thinking, hey, active listening is already being there for them, right? Then what does this actually mean? Now, being there for them, again, it is very active. First of all, it begins with communicating. I recognize, for example, that recently things have been tough, right? Why is this so powerful? It's powerful because we acknowledge through our communication that things may not be great at the moment. Now, this is powerful because also we are not dismissing or ignoring. Sometimes, for example, things may be changing in the organization, but the leader feels, oh, I don't want to worry people, so I'm not going to tell them anything. However, your employees probably already can sense that things are not going the way that it should, right? For example, when the pandemic first started, I remember listening to a video by the CEO of Airbnb. Now, Airbnb, we are all pretty familiar with it. We book it when we travel. But when the pandemic hit, everything was stationary, literally. No planes were flying, which means all the Airbnb houses were not being taken up, and therefore Airbnb's revenue started to plunge. Now, when I watched the video of the CEO started something like this. Good afternoon, everybody. As we all know, the pandemic has hit everybody, and as a result, everything has come to a standstill. It has also come to a standstill for us here in Airbnb. I don't want to lie to you by telling you that it's going to be easy. Neither do I want to raise your hopes by telling you everything is going to be fine. At the moment, things aren't looking that great. However, my commitment to you is that we will do our best to keep everybody with us here at Airbnb. Notice that communication and acknowledgement, it is done in a way that says, I'm here for you. I know things aren't easy at the moment, but I'm here for you. A very, very powerful speech that communicated great empathy. The next part of it is explain what is happening, right? So for example, it could sound something like this. The reason is that there have been some challenges with the supply chain and hence, blah, blah, blah. So in the same speech, the Airbnb CEO went on to say, the reason is that because of the grounding of planes and the flights not happening, people are not traveling, that is the reason why these things are happening, right? Why does explaining what is happening, why does that convey empathy? It shows as well that you are not going to make assumptions, and being clear in your communication about the reason is actually being kind to your employees because it doesn't leave them guessing. Now, if the external environment is already so chaotic and there's so much uncertainty, they have so much chaos in their mind. When you communicate in this way, by explaining why they are experiencing what they are experiencing, whether it's personally or as an employee or in the company, you are giving them clarity. And clarity is kindness. Clarity is stability. Because you can be that pillar of stability amidst all the chaos that's going on around them. Okay, so communicate by acknowledging, explain what is happening, and then finally, offer support and encouragement. Thank you for putting in the hours and rushing through the deadlines, even while you are trying to balance home and work. I want you to know that I'm here for you. Offering support and encouragement cannot be discounted. After all, if they're going through a hard time, you can be able to be that pillar. I'm not saying that you need to be everybody's mom and dad. I'm saying that in your role as a leader, you can care for your employees by acknowledging the work that they're putting in, by acknowledging their effort of what they're doing for the team, for the organization, and maybe even going a step further by acknowledging them and what they do at home. Now, this reminds me of an amazing story. I listened to a podcast between Adam Grant and the retired PepsiCo CEO. Her name has just flown out of my mind, but she was at the helm of PepsiCo for 18 years. And she said that one of the things that she did when she first stepped up to be CEO is that she wrote a thank you card to each of her employees. And at the time, there were thousands of employees, parents, handwritten notes. That was her first task as the CEO. And she wrote to them saying, thank you for raising up your son or daughter so that she or he can be here in PepsiCo and contribute in the way they're contributing. And it wasn't just a generic message, it was all individualized, sent to the parents. And after she had done that, all the staff members came in with tears. And so did the parents, sending her notes back as well to let them know how seen they felt, how validated they felt, how valued they felt. So empathy, although if you just look at the definition of stepping into someone's shoes, being able to see their point of view, all seems like very textbook, right? But what does it actually look like in action? I hope that by giving you all these little nuggets and different stories, you're now starting to get a picture of what it actually looks like in person, in real life. Now, for those of you still in a hybrid working arrangement, is it still possible? Yes, absolutely. We can offer support and encouragement even through this kind of platform that we have, right? Because we can begin meetings by asking or acknowledging everybody's win, for example, right? So go around the team and say, hey, what is one win that you have achieved this week? A small win. You can begin by sharing, and then everybody can have a round table. Just imagine how high the morale would be in your team, because you're not just focusing on the task, you're also focusing on their accomplishments. And that acknowledgement can go a very long way. Okay. So thank you, Elaine, for, yes, Indra Nui, you're right. I know there was a E, but I've forgotten the rest of her name. Thank you so much. So yes, okay, I hope that all these stories, and if you're interested to listen to the episode, you can check out Adam Grant's podcast. I think it's called Taken for Granted. Okay, and you can look for the episode where he interviews her. And I thought, wow, that's mind-blowing. A lot of work, a lot of effort, but people started to want to work for her. Okay, so I'm gonna sum up this segment here on engaging the practical strategies for empathy. If you are asking how to create a more empathetic workplace, you're already way ahead of everyone else. Why do I say this, or why does Daniel Lubetsky say this? Because Sometimes at work, we think of work as just being work. However, we forget that behind the computers, behind an email that's written, behind a process or structure that has been designed, is actually a human being. And a human being has emotions, a human being has thoughts, a human being has ups, and a human being has downs. And in your organization, if you begin to put the human at the center of your actions, at the center of your thoughts and your decision making, you'll find that you are likely to experience increased engagement, increased retention, right? And in this day and age, I know that a lot of companies are struggling to hang on to their staff, and many are leaving. I think you've also heard of the term the Great Resignation. And one of the top findings that they've found is that people leave because they find their workplace to be toxic or they feel disrespected, right? Empathy has got a lot to do with respect, respecting their perspective, respecting their circumstances, respecting their perspective and opinions, where they come from. So if you are asking how to create a more empathetic workplace, you're already way ahead of everyone else. So all of you here are in the front line of leading this charge to become more empathetic leaders. So in conclusion, I just want to summarize some of the key points that we have learned today, and then we're going to take some questions, of course. Use empathy to engage. Okay, whether it's at the workplace, of course, today has been very much focused on that. But, if you have other people in your life, empathy is such a powerful tool and skill to have. By, first of all, imagining how someone else is feeling and trying to see or understand their perspective. Demonstrate active listening by validating how they might be seeing, how they might be experiencing something, right? Remember to avoid judgment and meet them where they are. Use empathy building questions as a way to check in, as a way to gain clarity, as a way to understand how they are experiencing things, and be present and supportive. Instead of thinking, I don't need to say anything, maybe you want to say, I want to communicate something. I want them to know that I care. And keeping quiet is not going to be able to do that. And remember, acknowledge what they are going through, their wins, their hard work, their ability to achieve what they can achieve. And if you apply all these steps, you'll definitely see, like the statistics have shown, an increase in the percentage of your employees being engaged and also innovating. So I hope that all these little tips have been helpful to you. I think we can take some questions, but before we do that, I just want to say thank you for being here with me tonight. I know some of you are also here on the recording and also listening on live stream. So thank you for tuning in. Do connect with me on LinkedIn, as you can see, Shan Yo Map. If you have a question, you can also email me and follow my socials at Happiness Scientists. Thank you so much, everybody. Back to you, Elaine.
Thank you so much, Cheyenne.
You're
Very,
welcome.
very helpful, very empowering as I was imagining it. Thank you.
welcome.
I always learn something new when I host or moderate a webinar. I really
Yes, that
like
is the added bonus for you,
yes,
right?
yes. It's my way of educating and refreshing myself as well. I really like all the practical tips and examples that you have given. I love your story, and all the content and just personal examples that you have shared. You've made it as relevant and practical as possible. So hopefully the participants in Zoom and in FB Live and all those who will watch the recording later on would find it the same. And while we're waiting for questions from here in Zoom or in FB, I do have some present questions, Shine, that I can read. But I do encourage as well those who are in Zoom here to send in their question. We have the next 5 to 10 minutes to read your questions or comments. You can also unmute yourself, raise your hand to unmute yourself, or just type on the chat box. Okay, so for those in FB, just type as well your comments or questions, and somebody is looking into that. So one of the present questions, Cheyenne, which is I guess it's popular because there were about three from the registrants who asked this question. How can we address some of superiors, I guess, the senior leaders or managers who, this is very literal, who are eating their youngs. I guess what they mean is who are not empathetic, So when you have senior leaders or managers who are not as empathetic, yeah.
Yeah.
Any
I think
comments on
that's a
that?
great question. And first of all, I'll say that you must be in a difficult position, right? If you have sent in this question, maybe it's something you're experiencing at the moment, and seeing that maybe 3 participants have raised it, so maybe it's something that's a common experience for people who are tuning in. I would say, number one, the practical thing is to identify potential ways to get your feedback to the supervisor. It may not be directly, unless you feel that you can go to them directly. Or it could be through other platforms, right? It could be through maybe HR, if you think that is serious enough, right? Or it could be through an associate who maybe knows this person, and maybe you can talk to them and say, hey, I'm really struggling with trying to work together with this person. Do you have any advice or tips or ways in which I can connect better with this person? So that could be your first approach. Of course, for example, if it does get a lot and they are really like eating you up, then I would say, it may be something worth asking yourself. Is this something you want to continue to put up with? And how much is it impacting your ability to function at the workplace?
Yeah.
Now, if it has a serious impact on your ability to function, then it's not tolerable anymore. Then you have 2 options. One is to bring it up during an appropriate time with your supervisor. And I would say don't jump into that conversation cold, but be prepared and think through what you want to say with clear intentions, and recognize that the supervisor may not be empathetic, but that they have probably got a lot of burdens on their shoulder as well. So much as we want to assume they're not empathetic to us, maybe what we want to do in that preparation phase is to remove the assumptions and think, what could this person also be going through? So in some way, we are using empathy to understand them. Because any good conversation, even with a supervisor who appears to not be very nice, begins better if you already show that, hey, I get it. Being a leader means you have tough decisions to make, means sometimes you have to do the right thing even when you let people down. But at the same time, I want to continue having this working relationship with you, and at the moment I'm really struggling with this. Right. So I think if you lead with that empathy as well, it's more likely to have a favorable outcome.
Yeah.
Of course, however, if you have had many opportunities and you've brought it up many times and the person is still dismissive or neglectful, that's when you have to make a choice. Is it worth staying where you are? Yeah, but I suggest trying the first few paths first. Yeah, so hope that helps to answer whoever asked the question.
Thank you, Cheyenne. I think it does. It helps. It's not. Of course, it's easier said than done, right? But we can prepare, as you said, and role model. Well, supposedly the senior leader is the role model, but model it ourselves, right? So we're all We
and
can
if
all
it
practice.
helps, you can find somebody that you trust and actually do a role play. I think that can also be helpful, so that you can also be prepared for different kinds of responses.
The responses.
Right? Yeah, so that you're not caught you're not caught by surprise.
That's right. Okay, so thank you so much. And there's another question that came actually. So, are there limitations to empathy. When do we not
Mm.
practice empathy? It's kind of related probably to to that first one, because you know, you mentioned at some point you have to also weigh if you know the culture of or the organization
Mm.
you know is still it is the one that where you want to stay. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, as mentioned, one of the research findings, and this was another podcast. I like to listen to podcasts as I do my
Hmm.
morning walk.
Hmm. And
And there
Adam
was,
Grant is very interesting. Yep. Yeah, I
yes, and
listen
another
from time to
podcast that
time.
I highly recommend is Brandi Brown's
Oh
podcast,
yes, yeah,
Dare to
I
Lead.
like her. Yep.
Yeah, and she interviewed these two researchers. I'm really bad with names, but they are like a father and son team.
Mm-hmm.
And they did a lot of research into the top 5 reasons people leave organizations, and the first one is a toxic workplace.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so if your direct supervisor is behaving in a toxic way, toxic means that despite all your feedback, it's unchanging and is dumbing you down and it's affecting your mental health,
Mm-hmm.
then that's when, yes, you definitely have to make a decision. But
Mm-hmm.
to answer the question, is there such a thing as too much empathy? Well, I'll say that there are limits and boundaries
Mm-hmm.
that we can draw around us. For example, I'm a very emotional person and I'm very sensitive as well. So I know that in certain circumstances, if I use too much empathy, I'm likely to get overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
For example, when I used to work in the college and I was the resident counselor, sometimes I would get students come in and tell me very challenging stories. And because I attune to their emotions so quickly,
Mm-hmm.
I find that after 3 or 4 of those consultations, I'm flooded.
You get, yep, yeah.
So we have
It
to
can get,
understand ourselves, right? We
yep,
need to have self-awareness.
yep.
And if we recognize that, every day we're coming home overwhelmed and flooded, that is probably an indication for you that
Mm-hmm.
something is not right already,
Mm-hmm.
right? And therefore we need to ask ourselves those questions, how long has this been going on? How is it really impacting me as a person, not just as an employee? How much am I willing to put up with? What is the cost? What are the benefits? And then where am I going to draw this line for myself?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not being selfish. That's being taking care of yourself,
Yes, yeah,
right? Yeah.
yes.
So that you don't put yourself in circumstances where you are going to be constantly, where your boundaries are going to be constantly broken.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because
Yep.
then you'll end up, not caring about yourself.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of those you know, especially in the last two years or so, when the pandemic happened. And of course today we hear a lot of challenges, you know, for our mental
Yeah.
that's happening for our mental, emotional, total well-being. Yeah, so it's very important to have that self-care, as you said. And to
Yeah, I
that,
mean, even in
yeah.
helping and giving to others, you may
Mm-hmm.
think, "Oh, I want to help, I want to give." But if you are spent and you're exhausted,
You
then
cannot give.
maybe that is not the best time to
Yeah.
exercise empathy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And so, you know, in this world today where we work remotely, we're in a hybrid world. You mentioned, and this is probably the last question because I'm looking at the time.
Yeah.
We only have 5 minutes left. How can we express or you know, you mentioned about communicating with personal touch or
Mm.
making space, you know, but that space is mostly digital or virtual now, or we're going back to the office, but then it's still very much hybrid or remote working for some organizations. Do you have
Mm.
any tips on that, Cheyenne?
Yeah, I would say, like, apart from what I shared earlier, sometimes we can, when we are in the workplace physically, we bump into each other at the pantry and then we say, let's go for lunch, right? And that's where connection happens. Yeah,
Yes.
but in the digital world, to do that is very rare. Like, you don't bump into anybody.
Yeah.
So instead, we probably have to be intentional, right? And maybe we can set up meetings not to do work, but to get to know each other,
Yeah.
right? There's so many digital tools that we could use as well, like Kahoot, where you play quizzes, right? Or
Yes.
Mentimeter to get to understand people. So we can leverage the technology to help us to, connect better, be empathize with our team,
Mm-hmm.
right? And of course, the other one is you can go old school, where people use digital. You can do what PepsiCo CEO did and maybe send a note, or
Right.
maybe I've
Yep.
heard this in some,
Handwritten.
handwritten, or even just a text message to say, hey,
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about you, even though, we are not seeing each other. And
Mm-hmm.
it could be, here's an inspirational quote to start your day, something simple like that. Or depending on the circumstance that they're going through, maybe it's a very hot, you can also consider, hey, in that country, are there apps that
Mm-hmm.
or websites that you can order like a drink to be sent to them?
Yep.
And say, hey, I know things have been really difficult. I hope this drink helps you to get through your work.
Yeah.
So there are many creative ways. I think,
Yes.
if we keep our mind open, we'll see so many opportunities all around us to actually connect with people and empathize.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, the digital technology can be an enabler, in fact, and
Yes.
yeah, it doesn't have to hinder us from connecting personally. As I say, I've heard this phrase, high tech but high touch as well.
Yes, that's
Yes.
right.
So thank you so much
Yeah.
for those tips, Cheyenne.
You're
And
welcome. Thank you so much for having me, inviting me. And it's so good to reconnect again after all these years,
yes.
Elaine.
Yes, and we should also connect in person
For
soon.
sure.
It's Cheyenne, just a side story. We certified in one coaching course together. In fact, I think twice. I'm not too sure if once or twice, but we went through a coaching course and certification many
Yes,
years
yes.
ago. So it would be nice to reconnect in person again, Cheyenne. And I
Yes,
really
for sure.
appreciate your time and all the content and all the stories and personal examples and practical tips that you
You're
have given.
welcome.
So thank you so much, Cheyenne. And I believe it's the only time we have. We do have questions, that we receive from the registrants and also sent personally to me, and we'll try to answer them. I think Cheyenne answered most of them already in her presentation. So thank you again, Cheyenne. And I would just like to just close with a couple of announcements from POWERinU. So you don't miss out, subscribe at www.powerinu.com.ph on updates, webinars, and free resources. And we'd like to invite you to next month's complimentary webinar. We have a panel, actually. We have this on November 10, entitled Best Practices to Build a Culture of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Work. I will be hosting and moderating it again. I'm very happy to and honored to have two distinguished guests like Cheyenne. They're well recognized in their workplaces and will be sharing a lot of learnings and experiences, advices, about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we'll have two guests, Margie Pagdanganan, who is Asia Pacific Operations Head of Citi Global Wealth, and Bernadette Lucanas, who is Senior Technical Account Manager for Google and the DEI Network Lead for Google Cloud in Japan and Asia Pacific. So they will share about how personally they have participated and supported DEI practices in their respective workplaces, and also share how these practices have built and continuously developed the corporate culture in Citi and Google, engage employees, and even facilitate better business results. So all of you who are here will get an automatic invite, and we do hope that you can register and join us next month. We also like to share about an online public workshop on strategic solution selling, our BEST, our Best Building Excellent Sales Teams workshop that have been tried and tested by many organizations in the region and locally in the Philippines. So BEST is a strategic solution selling workshop that aims to teach the skills, processes, and tools that will help teams achieve business development, sales, and account management plans and activities with more predictable, measurable, and repeatable results. And you can register to all three modules that we're offering in this program, or to just a specific module that you want. And you can avail of group rate and for a group of 3 or more. Well, the early bird discount has passed, but we still have the group rate. So just go to the POWERinU website to register. And lastly, we'd like to just ask you to take the 10 seconds to answer the short poll. We'd like to continuously improve, and we'd like to hear your feedback about our webinar tonight. Again, you can access the recording through POWERinU's website, Facebook page, and YouTube channel. So, thank you so much again for everyone who participated here in Zoom and in FB Live, and for those who will be watching this through YouTube and our website. And we hope to see you again next month. Thank you again to Cheyenne. Thank you to all of you. Have a good evening, and see you again in POWERiNU's webinar on November 10. Bye.